All right, welcome everyone to our first focus webinar of 2026. So for those of you who are joining for the first time today, it's great to have you with us. Just to give you an idea, the purpose of the focus series webinar is to continuously elevate clients' engagement. So we run these sessions once a month for 30 minutes where we focus in on a particular aspect of Asset Map or enabling a specific conversation or new features so that you can practically incorporate that into your client's engagement process. So a little bit of housekeeping. Benny, like you said, is on the chat. So please, if you have any questions as we progress through the work, through this presentation, please just pop it on the chat. We will have a bit of time at the end as well. We are also recording the session, so we will share that with you afterwards. But let's start with today's topic, which is enabling engagement through frameworks. Now, if you have joined our Advice Framework webinar before, then this will be a nice refresher, but we also have a new framework that we're sharing for the first time today. So please stay on for that. All right, let's start by talking about frameworks in general. Why frameworks? So these are two sort of well-known frameworks that you may have heard of, the APCOS scoring charts that's used by medical doctors when babies are born, the OODA loop that's used by fighter pilots when they're being fired on. And I wanted to point these two out first. Why do we talk about frameworks and how can they be useful? Well, when doctors follow this framework when babies are born, the reason they do that is because it's high pressure environments, high emotion. They want to make sure that they are working through a logical, systematic approach. So they look at the appearance of the baby, the pulse, the grimace, the activity, the respiration, and they measure each one of those. Even if we find something on the first one, we still go to the next, the next point and the next point and the next point. And they don't only do it once, they do it 5 minutes later, 10 minutes later, so that they can see whether the baby is progressing. Similarly with the OODA loop, that's used by fighter pilots when they're being fired on. They don't know if they're upside down or right way around. It's intense pressure. The idea behind this frame is take a moment to observe, orient, decide, and then act. And that's where frameworks become really useful. Now, I'm not saying we're in exactly the same a sense of pressure, but financial planning is also a pressurized environment. We're dealing with lots of different clients that are at different places in their journey. Their emotions are high. They can be in a really vulnerable state. And frameworks, just like they do in other professions, can help us follow that logical, systematic approach, make sure we don't miss anything. So let's look at it in terms of financial planning. What can advice frameworks help us in our day-to-day? So the first thing is that it enables that consistent engagement. If we just take a minute to think about the mental load we all carry in financial planning. We might have 3 or 4, 5 client meetings a day. They're all at different places. There's a lot of different conversations we have to have. We're thinking about the business as a whole, tech stack. Are we, what about compliance? There's a lot on the go, and we could go into a client meeting with a million different thoughts. But using a framework allows us to just follow that consistent engagement approach. It allows us to be comprehensive, make sure we don't miss anything, and it's repeatable. So it gives us the ability just to let go of that mental load that we're carrying and really zoom and focus in on one framework. It's also powerful because even if we're using the same repeatable, comprehensive framework with every client, the conversation that's going to be elicited out of that is unique and personal to the client that we're engaging with, depending on where they're at in the journey and what they're dealing with at that point in time. So it just gives us the ability to be really present in that moment of the client, really actively listen, follow that logical approach, and make sure it's always a unique engagement. And that's really interesting to see the same framework and just what conversation comes out of it and how that's different and unique for each client. So advice frameworks, just to summarize, they give us a uniform approach to consistent personalization. Now, the first framework I want to talk through is something we call the 3 E's. And this is sort of a framework, but it's also an outcome. And those 3 E's stand for explore, educate, and elevate. And the reason I say this as an outcome is that we're going to go through a few different frameworks today that help us to explore, educate, and elevate. But I wanted you to keep these three in the back of your mind, that that's what in every engagement with the client, we want to work through this framework. We want to explore with them, want to educate, and we want to make sure that we're taking a step forward with every client, with every engagement, and elevating their position. And interestingly enough, just over a year ago, Australia released new legislation where they said, as a planner, after every engagement, you need to document and prove how the client took a step forward after that engagement. So what was the step forward that they took? And while that may feel quite daunting, I love that it's about that progression. As long as we are continuously elevating the client's position, what is the next best step forward for that client? And if we think about, the asset map itself, when we create that map for a client, often planners will say, okay, well, once I've created the map and I'm going to go in and sit down with the client, what's the conversation that I have with them? This is the one that we use for that. What are the frameworks we can use to explore, educate, and elevate? Because that's going to give us that conversation. Now, often asset map is referred to as a treasure map, because if you think about the client, it's sort of a snapshot of their journey up until now. Everything we see on the map is, reflects the decisions they've made, what's important to them, what gaps they may have, or what sits behind each of the things that they've accumulated in their life, what sits behind it for them. And using these methods, we can explore that together. So what are some of the frameworks we can use for exploring, educating, and elevating? The first one is the 5 whys. Second one is 4 frames. And then we've got the 6 L's. So they're nice and easy to remember. 5 whys, 4 frames, 6 L's. But they help us to do these 3 different things. Let's start with the 5 whys. So you may recognize the picture in the background. It's from a TV show called Detective. His name is Detective Columbo. And if you have seen the series, you might remember it a little bit. If not, I'll share a little bit about the premise with you. But the idea is he would go in as an interrogator. So he would go interrogate potential suspects. And he had quite a unthreatening, disheveled sort of appearance. And he'd come into the interrogation room and he'd ask a couple of questions, and the person or the suspect would feel like, I've definitely got away with this. He has no idea. And then as he would walk out of the room, he would turn around and say, just one more thing. And that one more thing would be the unraveling and lead to them being caught. Now, the 5 whys is not suggesting we're following sort of an interrogation with clients, but the idea behind this is to ask really powerful, intentional questions. And this is a great framework to use in preparing for a client meeting. Once you've created the map, look at it and ask yourself, what are the 5 things that I see on this map that I can ask the client to tell me more about, that will give me an insight into understanding what's important to them, understanding if there's gaps, and help shape the plan that we're going to put together for the clients. Now, often we say the question why. If you ask someone, why do you have this investment? It might be met with a little bit of defensiveness. So I always like to say, use the phrase, tell me more. And good examples, if you're looking at the map and you can see a client's income and they're employed, for example, say, tell me more about your role in XYZ company. How long have you been there? What does the future look like? There. And just by asking these open-ended questions just about this one block, we can gain an insight into, useful information that we can then use in the planning, but also an insight into the clients. Another example is if clients have additional properties, often we think of that as that can be brought into the plan or potentially sold later. But sometimes just asking that question, tell me more about this property you have here. What does that mean for you? And hearing it could be, a holiday place that's been passed down from generation to generation. It could be a strong emotional commitment to it. And that information is needed in order to plan appropriately. So this framework is all about exploring. It's great when you're sitting down with a client in front of the map. Think about what are the 5 questions you can ask that will give you more insight. And we want to ask, the way in which we ask it and how we ask the question is also important. We want to ask it with a genuine curiosity to understand more. I like to, equate that to if you walk into someone's office for the first time or their home for the first time, you'll see, photo frames with pictures of people that are important to them, or trophy cabinets, or awards that they've got. And you'd walk in and you'd ask about it. And we want to use this framework in the same way. We want to ask with that curiosity of, tell me about these trophies, tell me about these investments or assets or liabilities that you see on the page. And understand more from the client in that way. Okay, so that's the 5 whys. Again, great for exploring, great in preparing for the meeting, but just really opens up the conversation. Then the next framework I want to talk about is the 4 frames. Now, this is really inspired by the fact that whenever 2 people look at the same asset map, they see something different. So we always say, before you go see a client, just show one other person in the office their asset map and ask, what comes up for you. And you'll see that it's, often is very different. Things pop up because we all have our own lenses that we're viewing the map in. And based on that, we'll see things a little bit differently. So this approach is about being intentional about that, about putting different lenses on and viewing the map in that way. So we can look at it, if we look at the map from an investment point of view, then we're going to start to think about, are they targeting the return they need? Is there consolidation required? Do they have products that could be beneficial? Is there gaps? If we look at it from a legal point of view, then we're going to be thinking about structure, what sits in their name, what sits in the trust or in the business. Is it optimally structured, or are there changes we need to make? We can look at it from an insurance point of view. Then we're going to be thinking about, is there life cover? Should they have income protection? What about insurance with the business or short term? And if we look at it from a tax point of view, we might be thinking about, what products they have, do they have an ISA or not, or some sort of tax-free investment, or what are the other tax implications, or if we structured it differently, could they have a more beneficial tax situation? So depending on the lens we're looking at the map in, different things will come up for us. So this framework is about really being intentional about viewing it from those different lenses. It's also great in the conversation with the clients. So even if, you've gone through all of this with the clients and it's structured appropriately for all these different lenses, it's a great conversation to take the client through, to share with them, what we do as financial planners is that we view this picture from an investment point of view, from a legal point of view, from an insurance, from a tax point of view, and explain what are the things that we've done in each of those areas and whether there are gaps or things we need to do going forward. It's just a great way of educating the client, getting on the same page, but also a way for them to really experience the value that we're adding in financial planning. All right, the next framework I'm going to go through is the 6 R's. Now, this also known as the financial fire drills. This framework is inspired by, something we've all probably experienced, which is a fire drill. So if we think about why we've all experienced fire drills, is because we know that if there ever is a fire, it's chaos. Everything goes crazy, and it's important that when there's chaos that we have a process and an approach and everyone's aware of it. And this is what we're going to do in the event of that. And, that's what we do with the fire drill. We look at what stairs are we going to go down, where are we meeting, who's doing the roll call, what is the plan going to be, so that when that chaos hits, everyone is on the same page. And this is bringing that same thinking into financial planning. What are the 6 events or unforeseen events that could happen that could derail a client's plan? They're often emotional events. So we want to make sure we have an approach or a process in place and a plan for each of those events should they happen. So if we go through the list of them, the first one is liquidity. If there's a liquidity event, for example, someone loses their position, what is our plan in place? Do we have emergency funding that we can easily access, or debts that we can access, so that should that happen, there's a plan in place and everyone knows what it is? What if there's a disability in the family, or there's a loss of life, or somebody becomes ill? And longevity looks at, what if we live longer than we expected? And there it's about talking about the family impact of that and what that legacy looks like. And the last one being legacy, is everything in place? Is the will in place? Do we understand who gets what, and what that process will look like in the event of someone's death. So working through the 6Ls with the client is just a great way of checking in and educating around what are the different events or unforeseen events that could take place. Do we have a plan in place for them? Does it require modification? And let's make sure everyone is aware of what that plan is. A useful resource that you can use is in the report section in Asset Map. You can download the Financial Fire Drills or 6Ls report. And what this does is just list all the different areas of those 6Ls, so liquidity, disability, loss of life, long-term care, longevity, and legacy. And the purpose of this is to actually work through this document together with the client and their map. So we're showing them the asset map, and we're going step by step through each of these sections to say, show me on the map, what is our plan if someone loses their income and there's a liquidity event? Well, we're going to use this emergency funding, or we're going to access debt here. So let's mark off, we have a plan, what requires modification, and note it together. So you can see how this approach will help educate clients around how the investments and assets and risk cover that they have, how it can be used to help in these unforeseen events, but also just ensuring we're all on the same page. So it's a great tool for educating. It's a great showing clients the plan and ensuring they know what their plan is in the event of these happening. So those three that we went through now was all focused around exploring, educating, and elevating. This is a new framework that we're sharing today on priority setting. I apologize, it's also six C's. This framework we put together, given the fact that we added priorities to Asset Map last year, we thought now is a really good time to talk through a goal setting or priority setting approach or framework that you can bring into your process. Now, oftentimes when a client approaches you for the first time, they've either been referred to you or they have a very specific need that's sort of top of mind for them. An example is a client will often phone and say, I need life cover. That's why I'm speaking to you. Or I need to review my retirement. That's why I've been referred to you. And the first step in this priority setting framework is uncovering what that is top of mind for the client. So we want to capture and uncover what is it that's top of mind. Maybe it's something that's keeping them up at night or just something that they're focused on. We want to uncover that with the client. Tell me more about that. Maybe the client shares, well, the reason I think I need life cover is some family friend passed away and they didn't have it in place, and it's strung a nerve for me that I need to actually do something about that. And uncovering that with them means understanding what emotion sits behind that for the client. And, if you need life cover, what would that be for? What sort of income would you need? Would we be covering debt? Really unpack whatever's top of mind, because often when the client comes to you and they have something that is really top of mind for them, they can't move off of that and explore potentially other priorities that may be even of a higher priority than that, but they can't get to that until they've expressed what is really top of mind for them. So the first step in this priority setting is uncovering what is top of mind and really unpacking that. Then the next step is creating calm. We want to reassure and acknowledge the client that we understand and empathize with the importance of that, and that we are going to address that as part of the planning. This step is so important because until the client feels reassured and acknowledged that this thing that's top of mind for them is going to be resolved, they can't really move on to exploring broader, which is the next step. And it may be that you don't do this all in one session. You may sort of address that first need first, but it's important that we then go back to say, okay, well, how can we now take the next step, which is consider, inviting the client to explore broader. We've captured this priority, but what about in the event that you become disabled? What do we do then? Or let's have a look at retirement. What sort of priorities do you have there? Or education needs. So it just gives you the ability to then expand the conversation and explore broader with the clients. Once you've done that step, the next one is clarify. It's important to refine and prioritize the client's different goals or priorities that they have. And what I mean by refine is really word them in the words the client would use. So if, for example, if a client says, I need life cover, unpack a little bit what sits behind that for them. I want to make sure my family is secure in the event of my death. Then let's use that wording. We want to use the wording that really depicts what the client's goal is, because there may be many ways that we achieve that, but we want to understand and rename that priority. We also want to assign importance. Let's work together and decide what is of the top priority, what's second, what's third, what are we doing later, what are we doing now. Once we've refined and prioritized, then we want to connect it. And what I mean here is it's probably one of the most vital points in priority setting is connecting it to an emotion for the client. So in other words, they're feeling fearful that something might happen and they don't have cover in place. Let's switch that to what would you feel if that was all sorted out? If you knew that you could provide that income, you had enough insurance in place, plus investments if that's the need, what would that emotion feel like? And that might be joy, it might be peace, it might be relief, it might be accomplishment, whatever that emotion is, we want to connect it to that, because that is what's going to encourage clients to do the next one and do the next one. Is saying, that's what I'm working towards. I want to feel organized. I want to feel that relief or joy or accomplishment of achieving these priorities. And last, but probably most importantly, is we want to celebrate. So as and when a client achieves a priority, we want to acknowledge that, take time to celebrate the things that we've done and connect it back to that emotion that we were striving to achieve. So that's really important in just getting clients to feel encouraged to do it again and again, but we want to celebrate that. And now we've added priorities into Asset Map. We've also added it into Sidebar, so you can show a client very quickly going through it. These are the ones that we've done that we can celebrate. These are the ones that are of top priority, and these are the ones we're doing later. So yeah, please try out this framework, work through that with the client. But just to reiterate, we want to first meet them where they're at. We want to reassure them, acknowledge that, and then expand and explore broader, clarify and connect that to the emotion. And just to give you an example of what that could look like in Asset Map, under priorities, you can add in, because it's customizable, you can really use the words the client uses. So a family trip to Europe in the next 10 years. And you can even add in that emotion to connect it. That's going to bring me joy. Or if you think appropriate, you can put in emojis there. If the client will relate to that better, then what's the emoji that we want to associate with that particular goal? And you can also bring that into reporting. So you always, in every new engagement and every review, connecting back to, are priorities the same? Have they changed? Do we need to refine again? Is there something new that's top of mind that we need to acknowledge, reassure, and then invite them to expand broader? All right, that brings us to the end of today. I'd really like you to think about, I know it's quite a few frameworks, but even if you just think about one that you want to bring into your 2026 client engagement and your review process this year, and just again, it just helps us release that mental load, really focus in so that we can have that personal conversation with the clients and make sure that we are present in every moment.